Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Paul Pugh, Thunder Bay City Councillor. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
So, Paul, let's just go back in time a little bit. Let's give the viewers a little bit of your background and history. Did you grow up in Thunder Bay, or how did you end up here?
Well, no, I grew up in a small South American country of Uruguay. And I lived in Brazil for a time. Then I went to university in the United States, and then graduate school at McMaster. And then eventually ended up here. So from the south of South America to the north of North America.
So
Bit of a journey.
Did you end up in Thunder Bay?
1980.
1980. And what did you think of it then?
Well, it was pretty much what I was hoping for, in the sense that my wife Evelina and I both like canoeing and camping. And where we had been living in Kitchener, we had to drive hours and hours to get to any sort of outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do that in Thunder Bay. It's a big area, so you can drive for hours and hours, but you don't have to. So, yeah, we're pretty happy. Well, we're still here.
Right on. So, and so you did a master's at McMaster.
Yes.
And what was your area of study?
Economics.
Economics. Okay, so you've got a good background for being a city councillor, perhaps, eh?
I find it's useful for a lot of things, for being able to understand how society works. Yeah, it's a good way to be able to analyze events, current and past.
So if some folks in the viewing audience were going, geez, I should learn a little bit more about economics, where would they start?
Oh,
What's
boy.
accessible and easy that a person can, is there econ for dummies or something like that?
Well, actually, that's a good question. You could go to, say, chapters, and there are a couple of books that I would recommend. Economics, A User's Guide. It's a good introductory text on economics, and it's not the economics that you would get in a first-year university course. It's economics in terms of how the economy fits into human society, which university courses rarely do.
Mm-hmm. And that's, in a way, some of the criticisms of normal economics is that it sometimes doesn't really deal with that interface with our environment.
The reason I didn't finish the doctoral program is because I realized, well, I came to the conclusion, I shouldn't say I realized, I came to the conclusion that economics is to today's society what the church was to feudalism. It's basically a quasi-religion that tells the poor to stop asking for more, to be satisfied with what they've got. That's my opinion.
Gosh.
That's my view. I realize not everybody shares that view, but after 2 degrees in it, I think I know the subject well enough to formulate an opinion.
Well, the one book I read in the last couple of years was by Jim Stanford.
Yes.
I forget the name, something also economics, but it felt like economics for dummies to me.
It's economics for everyone. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's a very good book. Yeah.
Cool.
Jim's a good friend of mine. Yeah.
So, why did you decide to run for a councillor on city council?
Well, I was realizing I was going to be retiring from the Bombardier plant, and the elections were coming up, and I wasn't prepared to be a full-time retiree just yet. So I thought, well, I'll run for council. That way I can stay active. I've been a social activist, mostly in the union movement, but peace movement, social justice, you name it. I've been involved for pretty well all my adult life. So I thought, well, this is a way to stay involved.
And so you stayed involved, I guess.
Well, I have stayed involved, yes.
You met that goal.
Actually, council turns out to be a lot more work than most people realize. But I ran for re-election, so I guess I knew what I was getting into. First time I didn't. First time it turned out that it was a lot more work than I anticipated because it's not just the Monday night evening. I think we all know that it's more than just a Monday night meeting, but we're all on lots of different committees, or most of us are anyway. I'm on 7 committees and boards, and some of those have subcommittees, so that the week gets taken up in going from one thing to another. If you're like myself, if you're that kind of a person, that's fine, but if you're not prepared to put in some time, council can be a bit more than you bargained for.
And so in a way you have an advantage of being retired, that you don't have to put in the 9 to 5, which then really reduces your ability to participate, I guess, in some of these different events and committees.
Absolutely, yeah. That one year when I was still president of the union at the plant and on city council was a pretty tough year. I was very busy, but I knew it was only for the 1 year, so I knew it wasn't going to be for the long term. Otherwise, I don't think I could have kept it up. Something would have had to give. But for 1 year, I just worked really hard and got through the year.
And so that last year, you ended your career as the president of the local union there at Bombardier.
Yes.
So we can see that path of activism and involvement. And so is there things that you learned serving your membership there at now Unifor? What is it?
Unifor, yes.
1075?
Local 1075.
1075, that you can now use in representing your constituents in city council.
There's some of it is transferable, but there are big differences between, between councillor's role and a union representative, president or otherwise. In terms of being able to speak publicly, in being able to chair meetings or be part of a meeting context, yes, those are transferable things. But the roles are very different. A union leader deals with problems directly. You go to you listen to your members' complaints or problems, and you take them up with the employer and get a resolve. You don't always get the resolve that you want, but you get a resolve. As a councillor, we don't actually do that at all. We don't run the city directly. It's city staff runs the city. What we do is we pass the budget and the bylaws that run the city, and those are the ones that the city staff use to run the city. But we don't directly administer anything. What we do is if a constituent phone us, which they do all the time, or send us an email, we contact the appropriate staff and ask them to look into it. But we don't actually get hands-on the way a union rep does. So it's quite different. It took a little while to get used to. But I must say that city staff are very helpful, very knowledgeable, and they do their best to assist at any time that we contact them.
Paul, we need to take a short break. Please stay with us. We're going to start digging into the meat and potatoes at City Council. We'll be right back.
Very good.
Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Paul Pugh, City Councillor for the City of Thunder Bay. Welcome back, Paul.
Thanks, Steve.
So, what are some of the successes that you've seen, or how we've moved the measuring stick forward at City Council? And so this is now, what, your 7th year or 8th year?
Yeah, into the 8th year, yes.
So what are some of the things you feel pretty good about that have happened in that time frame?
Well, I guess one of the ones that I feel good about that is of importance to McKellar Ward in particular.
Which is who you represent in terms
we
of
all councils represent the whole city, but
Yeah.
I was elected from McKellar Ward.
Okay.
Is in the issue of moving forward on flood prevention. You recall the flood in 2012, which is a terrible flood, and then we had another one in 2016. So they seem to be, these 100-year floods seem to be coming at more and more frequent intervals. So it's very important that the city do its best to try to prepare for the next one, which is, well, hopefully it doesn't come, but I sort of think that's wishful thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to see that there's been quite a bit of work done in flood prevention. I think it's been most successful in the Northwood Ward because they're higher up, so and the water runs down. The parts of McKellar Ward were at the bottom. In fact, some of McKellar Ward, the inner city part, is actually lower than Lake Superior.
Oh my gosh.
So that creates some pretty severe engineering problems on how you get the water to flow upwards out of the area once it flows in. And those are the areas that are taking the longest to resolve, but there is work being done, which I'm very happy to see. One of the things that affects all areas is the decoupling of the storm water from the sewer system, because one of the reasons the flood was so terrible in its effects in 2012 was because originally when the city was built, everything went into the sewers, but stormwater, there's no need for it to be treated. It's just water from the sky that can go straight out to the lake. It doesn't need to be treated. So separating those so that the stormwater can go straight out to the lake reduces the amount of water that has to go through the treatment plant and helps to prevent the damage that a flood such as 2012 caused. So that's one of the things I'm very happy about. Other things that are very important, in 2011, we've signed the historic agreement between the two councils, City of Thunder Bay and Fort William First Nations. And we now have joint meetings regularly. We just had one in February, I think. Yeah, February. And it's gone past ceremonial. Now we're talking about tougher stuff.
So what are some of those issues that you're trying to deal with?
Well, of
in
course,
partnership with?
everybody knows, you know, the bridge, and then there's issues concerning land issues and things like that. But it's good that we're going to be meeting together and talking about them and looking for a resolve, so that as we move ahead, the two communities can go ahead as real neighbors and friends, and these unresolved issues that have been laying there for generations are now finally being addressed. That doesn't mean that we're going to get a resolve immediately, but at least we're working towards it, and that's a first step that I'm very pleased about. Other things that I'm happy about is, well, it's along similar lines, is the donation of the Grandview Lodge to Matawa First Nations.
That was owned by the city, Grandview?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And now, of course, in partnership with the city, that they're going to be, well, it's turned over to them now, and they're going to be running it, and it's going to be a learning center and a home for youth that come in from those particular First Nations into that center, so that they have a safe place to go in the city. I think that's very good. And I'm hopeful, we'll see, I'm hopeful that we're going to see some progress towards resolving the issue with the soccer community in Thunder Bay, because that's the largest, by far the largest participatory sport in Thunder Bay, of course in the world too, but in Thunder Bay in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one that's been, it's in the worst condition. So I'm hoping that we're going to see some progress in that area.
And what about the challenges? Where do you think we could have done better in the last few years?
Well, it's a matter of funding, but I believe that we tend to, and not necessarily for bad reasons, but we tend to put a lot of emphasis on infrastructure, hard projects, hard engineering projects. And I'm concerned that in the particularly in this term, in the last few years, because of constraints on the budget and things, we have tend to cut back on programs that social programs that are very important because the city, we have to have the flood control, we have to have decent roads and things like that, but the city also has to have services for people, particularly those who aren't as wealthy, because people with lots of money or more money, maybe not even lots, but more money, you know, they may have a camp out in the bush or something, but there are a lot of young people in the city who don't, their parents don't have that kind of an income. And it's important to have our parks, and it's important to have recreational programs that they can take part in, because it's our future generations. And I don't feel that we've done enough in that area.
Do you, I was told by a friend that there's really been a major change, kind of downsizing in terms of staff levels, manning the parks like in the summertime. Is that, do you have an idea of what that range has been and what the impact might be?
Well, I don't have any figures offhand, but yes, when for example, in this last year, when the city manager was looking for ways to save money, it's true that we didn't go through with as many hard infrastructure projects as we would have liked to, but it's also true that the places that get affected first are in services, so that we don't have as many summer students, we don't have as many people in those areas that I enumerated earlier, parks and recreation, that are so important to people living in the downtown, particularly in areas such as the McKellar Ward. I see it in the Minnesota Park and the East End, places like that, there's so much more that needs to be done there, but we don't have the funds.
As you may know, or some of the viewers know, we have a Facebook page, and I encourage people to write in with questions. So I got 3 questions from some of our viewers. The first one, now, why is Councillor Pugh such a nice, considerate, and decent human being? Did you pay someone to put that up there or what?
No, I didn't.
How can you answer that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I suppose if I were to get a stab at it, I'd just say that, I don't know, I've always been concerned about others and concerned about social conditions. Going back to my childhood in Uruguay, I always took part in my first student strike when I was in 7th grade. It was the 10th graders who organized it, but I was happy to take part. It's a national student strike, and that's sort of the culture I came from. Uruguay, there's a lot of social activism, strong labor movement, and so I guess it's just part of my upbringing.
Thank you very much for that. We need to take another short break. Please stay with us, and we're going to wrap up with another couple tough questions. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Thunder Bay City Councillor Paul Pugh, and elected from McKellar Ward. So Paul, we, as I mentioned earlier, I've taken some questions from some of the folks that watch the show. So the second question is what's your plan to strengthen the small business community in your ward? How can you do that? How can you strengthen that small business community?
Well, I have had the privilege of sitting on both the Fort William BIA and also for the first term.
The Business Improvement Association.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And then this term on the Waterfront BIA. Actually, I was in the Waterfront BIA the previous term too. And so it gives me a chance to talk to small businesses and hear about their problems and their aspirations for the area they represent. And I suspect it's similar to other areas that don't have BIAs. I think what the city can do to help small businesses is provide a friendly and a lively city environment, one that people are happy to go downtown and either have a meal or go for some entertainment or go shopping, whatever. It's a matter of keeping the city looking clean and welcoming, and then the businesses themselves have to actually have something to offer to the public. But let's put that aside and assume that they're doing that. Then the city's role is to make sure that the environment in which they operate is a welcoming one, so that people want to go downtown. It's an issue that's facing probably most communities, because back in the 50s and 60s there was a move towards the automobile-based society and big box stores, and it sort of disintegrated the downtowns as a consequence.
Yep.
As people went to these large shopping malls, and it sort of took a toll on communities as a whole. We're trying, the city, not just Thunder Bay, but for sure Thunder Bay, is trying to reverse that. It's a hard thing to do. You can't undo generations of going one way and then suddenly flip a switch and have things go the other way. But we can do things to encourage intensification downtown, so that development doesn't keep going, sprawling out further and further and further away from the downtowns. We're trying to encourage development downtown now, or more downtown, so that there's more people downtown.
So the last question I got was, how do you feel about MPAC? First of all, what does MPAC stand for?
The acronym.
Is it municipal, provincial?
You got me there. I don't remember what.
So these are the people that determine the values of the property that we use to then base our taxation on. So
they assess the value of the property. It's a provincial body. And the acronym is sort of incorrect, because it says it starts off municipal, but municipalities actually have very little to say in it. Okay. It's a provincial body, and they come in and decide what the value of each property is. And I suppose, in theory, it might not be a bad thing, but the policies that they're implementing, and I'm not even sure it's the MPAC people themselves that choose these policies, I don't know, but the policy that they're following is that they are essentially shifting property taxes from the big box stores and the large commercial and industrial areas onto residential houses. So essentially they're shifting the taxation from income generating properties to properties where all it is just somebody's home. So I find it's the most regressive type of taxation. I believe that progressive taxation taxes income. This is going the other way. It's taking taxes away from income and putting on to people who just have a place because it's a place to live. So in Thunder Bay, we've lost over $20 million because of MPAC decisions.
Now, is that total or every year?
It's cumulative over the last, I forget, maybe 4 years. But that's a lot of money.
So what's the whole budget
back
for the
to
city?
what we were talking about earlier about what happens to social services, because when you have these crunches, there are some things that you can't squeeze much. Like we have to have some of the flood control, and we have to have police and emergency services. You can't squeeze those much. So when a city manager is looking for places to squeeze because of decisions from MPAC, which have diminished our funds substantially, then the first places to go are things that people need that make the city more livable. I think we're off track there, but when we were meeting with MPAC once, I called them thugs, strong-arm people for the commercial and the big businesses, and they shift the taxes onto residential homeowners.
Well, this is kind of reflective of taxation at the provincial and federal levels too, isn't it? Where we've seen a shift of more of the taxes is being paid by individuals and less of the tax burden is being paid by corporations through the corporate taxes.
It's part of the same agenda.
Same kind of deal.
It's called the neoliberal agenda. Yes, it's where basically the rich pay less and the rest of us pay more. And I think it's morally criminal, but that's the policy of the governments of the day. And at the municipal level, we have no say on it whatsoever because it's a provincial body. The impact is provincial, and they will do what they will do. What we have to do afterwards, because the taxes you actually pay is a function of the evaluation of your property times the mill rate. And so if the commercial and industrial sector is paying less tax, then there's only one place we can get it, and that's off the residences.
So in the last 30 seconds, what can we do, or what can the city do around reconciliation?
Oh, well, we're doing quite a few things. You can see that with, well, for example, the Grandview Lodge thing, the joint council meetings, and we're working the city staff between the city manager and the Fort William First Nation in particular, that we're constantly talking about things. But it also goes with Nan, Matawa, other First Nations, because as we know, this is the future of the city. It's the fastest growing section of the population, the youngest. It's our future. So we'd be fools if we didn't move toward reconciliation.
We've got to leave it right there. Thank you so much for joining me, Paul.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching, and check us out on Facebook and YouTube, Community Conversations. Please stay safe.